In the 12th century, works of brilliant Islamic scholars were still being written. Beautiful libraries stored the knowledge of the Islamic world, thin papyrus bound together to create books. But this knowledge wasn't protected for long. Armed soldiers, foreigners from a distant land, pillaged these libraries. Whatever they didn't burn, they took with them, robbing the Islamic world of their knowledge and culture. These acts of violence would continue for centuries to come, more and more knowledge taken from its homeland. This period of plunder and warfare would become known as the Crusades. The Crusades were a series of wars fought from the 11th to 13th centuries that were carried out by Europeans in hopes of gaining control of the Islamic world. The justification for many of these crusades was a hope to reclaim the Holy Lands in the name of God and save the people from Islamic control. Today, many people remember the Crusades for noble knights like Richard the Lionheart and heroic legends of valor. But what is less studied is how the Crusades impacted the people of the Islamic world, and specifically the spread of Islamic knowledge. During this time, the works of some of the greatest Islamic scholars began to appear in Europe. The Crusades have had long-lasting effects. They brought these works to Europe and distorted their reception. Moreover, the Crusades still impact how the Islamic scholars who wrote them are remembered today. The Crusades were not just a war on religion, but also a war on knowledge that would impact generations to come. Despite their devastating effects, and despite the obliteration of the relationship between Europe and the Middle East, the Crusades led to greater Western interest in the Islamic world. Although this interest existed mostly in the form of conquering land and resources, an interest in Muslim science was introduced. In 1109, between the First and Second Crusades, Frankish crusaders captured the city of Tripoli. A contemporary account claims that during this siege, the Crusaders plundered, quote, the books of its college and libraries of its private collectors. Many famous European scholars studied these plundered works. One notable European scholar who acquired works of Islamic scientists was Roger Bacon. In his work on optics, Bacon directly referenced the great Islamic scientist Ibn al-Haytham's theories and experiments. One of al-Haytham's greatest legacies was the invention of the experimental method, the scientific method that remains fundamental today. Though Bacon used and praised al-Haytham's experimental method, he did not correctly attribute it. Instead, Bacon credited his colleague Peter Peregrinus. Some scholars theorize that due to the ongoing Crusades, Bacon may have felt that attaching an Islamic scholar's name to the scientific method would slow its acceptance among Christians. The Crusades had the paradoxical effect of introducing Islamic knowledge into Europe and at the same time creating a difficult environment for its widespread acceptance. The European acquisition of medieval Islamic science was directly responsible for igniting the motivation in Europeans for scientific advancement. Without Ibn al-Haytham and al-Shatir, there would be no Bacon or Copernicus, and without Bacon and Copernicus, there would be no modern science. Copernicus is a very interesting example of the European acquisition of Islamic science. In the mid-20th century, it was discovered that Copernicus had used many discoveries from Islamic astronomers in his heliocentric model of the solar system. This included the Tusi couple, Urdi's lemma, and al-Shatir's lunar theory. In fact, historians of science Otto Neugebauer and Noel Swerdlow said of Copernicus that, quote, in a very real sense, he can be looked upon as, if not the last, surely the most noted follower of the Moraga school, a group of Islamic scientists dedicated to the pursuit of truth, signaling the idea that the European scientific revolution was a continuation of the Islamic scientific tradition. For centuries, Europe had used religion to claim superiority over Islamic peoples. But the long-standing justification began to change. Europe began to claim superiority via science. The very same science that it acquired through contact with the Islamic world. Thus, what scholars today call the classical narrative was born. Worse, that narrative lasted. It still exists. It's nonsense, of course. Hate is always nonsense. It is easy to see the effects of this classical narrative on science, the idea that Islamic scientists created nothing. This is what Western schools teach. Not that exactly, perhaps, but the final effects of that narrative, the long-term consequences of lies created to wage wars and ostracize Muslims. Students learn the names of white geniuses and are told they created science from whole cloth. We can confirm the falsehood of this by merely looking at the works of those European scientists, like by understanding Bacon's acknowledgement of al-Haytham's works. So let us pose a new question. If we know the truth, why don't we teach it? This is where the long legacy of Islamophobia, created and instilled by Christians during the Crusades, rears its head. When European leaders realized the economic benefits they could reap from wars like the Crusades, they had to manufacture a reason to convince peasants to take up arms. The easiest justification, the one they gave, the one we still give today, is hate. From the Crusades onward to the Renaissance to the extermination of Muslims in Spain to our modern so-called holy wars and genocides, the same reason has been given. American education does not mind this because America thrives when it unites its people against a perceived enemy, exactly as Europe claims to have thrived post-Crusades. Considering the Crusades, one calls to mind the words of Stephen Jay Gould, who said, "I am somehow less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops." White Europeans have stolen and pillaged for centuries, have claimed their superiority, and have killed those they deem inferior. They have called the ones they didn't kill barbarians. But we have proven these ideals wrong by contradiction. Look just at what we have found in science. Science can only truly be created and can only truly flourish within a broad society of mankind. And we can draw this point beyond the realm of science. We can realize that across any human discipline, nothing can be accomplished without collaboration.